Welcome to World History. Today we're going to be trying to tackle the Italian Renaissance, which is a process that transformed first Italy and Europe, starting in the 14 and 1500s, profoundly changing the way that we saw the world and our places in it. So, without further ado, let's dive in. By the end of this lesson, you should be able to explain the factors that led to the Renaissance, explain the Renaissance concepts of humanism, realism, and perspective, which we'll be going into, and analyze the way in which the Renaissance expanded literature. So let's dive in and try to tackle all of these topics. The Italian Renaissance, like a lot of the things we talk about in world history, starts with trade. Trade brings benefits and also costs to the people who trade. So one benefit of trade is it brought massive wealth to a number of city-states in Italy, like Florence and Genoa and Venice and Milan and all of these places. But one downside of trade is it also brought in disease, including the famous Black Death, which devastated the population of Italy and then spread throughout Europe, cutting the population of Europe by, somewhere between a third and a half. So this sounds terrible, but some people benefited from the Black Death because, of course, they were able to inherit money from their dead relatives. And after surviving this horrible event, they wanted to go out and experience new things, which led them to search for, types of knowledge and ways to live that they might not have looked at before. So all of this extra money coming in both from inheritance and from trade led Italy to become a source of new learning and new knowledge. This new learning and new knowledge specifically came from the old Eastern Roman world, and people like Petrarch here started to rediscover the writings of the Greek philosophers, which we talked about before, and some of the old Roman philosophers as well. And so they started to translate this into Italian, and Italians started to become interested in some of these Greco-Roman traditions. We also got many of these wealthy merchants to become patrons. Patrons are people who are wealthy merchants who then get involved in paying artists in order to make sure that they have like the best statues and some awesome paintings and things like that in their amazing estates, which created a market for people to learn new techniques and explore new ideas, which brings us to the artistic values of the Renaissance. So the Renaissance brings us three new artistic styles that we're going to talk about. The first one is perspective, which we see here as far as creating depth within paintings through vanishing lines. The second is humanism, sort of the greatness of humanity and the idea that humans have great potential to do things. And the third is realism, which is the idea that art should look very much like real life and that artists should study humans and humanity, like their bone structure and muscle structure, in order to create works of art that look incredibly lifelike, as you can see here in a number of these paintings. So we're going to dive quickly into the Ninja Turtles in order to examine each of these ideas. So one famous Renaissance painter was Raphael. He created this gorgeous work here. This is called the School of Athens. And this combines a number of different Renaissance techniques. On the one hand, we of course clearly see perspective, as it looks like you could walk right into the wall. It also focuses on humanism, because these are some of the greatest Greek thinkers. There's your Plato and Aristotle. And so it focuses on the greatness of humanity. And it focuses on Greco-Roman themes, which is different from a lot of art during the Middle Ages, which was predominantly paid for by the church, and so mostly showed religious themes. So we're seeing now more secular or non-religious themes within the artwork. Our second Ninja Turtle here is Leonardo, who we see his self-portrait over here. He's, of course, most famous for painting the Mona Lisa, which is a perfect example of both secularism, because it's non-religious, and realism, because her eyes follow you around the room in a very creepy way. But Leonardo also got involved in a lot of other things. This is one of the hallmarks of Renaissance men and women, is they didn't just focus on one thing, they tried to dabble in a whole bunch of different things. And so Leonardo was an expert painter and a sculptor, but he also dissected human bodies in order to learn more about human anatomy. He created theoretical new weapons of war, which may or may not have been effective, including this cool-looking bow shield here. And he imagined the idea of humans creating a flying machine, which was 100% non-functional, but kind of a cool idea. And so by dabbling in all these different things, Leonardo represents the Renaissance man, and he shows the Renaissance values of realism and humanism. Here we see Michelangelo's creation of Adam, which is painted on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, which you can see up here. The creation of Adam, of course, shows humanism because it shows the greatness of God passing on the divine spark of knowledge to humankind. And of course, also realism because, Adam is super buff there. You can clearly see his well-defined muscles. He also carved the Pieta here, which is an unbelievably lifelike sculpture, which sits today in St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican. And so Michelangelo represents a lot of these Renaissance ideas as well. And so you can see that all of these artists don't just represent one Renaissance idea, but incorporate a lot of these new ideas into their work. But Renaissance values and ideas were not just confined to the artistic world. You also started to see them move into literature as more and more people, as they got more money and wanted to experience more of the world, started calling for new types of art and culture. So you get guys like the playwright William Shakespeare. Shakespeare is famous for, of course, one, his plays are happening in English, so the average person can understand them. Secondarily, he's got very sort of complex characters and very complex plots. And he helped move the language forward by inventing a whole bunch of new words that are still part of the English language today. Plus, we're going to talk about this in class, but a lot of the stories that Shakespeare tells are told and retold again in our history through lots of different movies and things like that. You also have people like Machiavelli, who again, he was writing in Italian as opposed to English, but still not writing in Latin. Most of the work up until this point had been done in Latin because it was commissioned for church audiences. Machiavelli wrote about what makes a good ruler, and so this idea of philosophers trying to figure out the best way to do things as opposed to looking back at specific traditions is kind of a change. And so we'll read some Machiavelli and try to break his stuff down in class as well. And finally, you've got Thomas More. He's what's called a Christian humanist, which combines the ideas of humanism, the greatness of humanity, with the values of Christianity in order to try to make the world a better place. And so he wrote this book called Utopia, which is a Greek word that means nowhere, describing a perfect, wonderful world where everyone was happy, with the idea that if we combine the greatness of humanity with Christian values, maybe we could someday create/live in a utopia. How wonderful. So that brings us back to our objectives. Make sure when you finish this video, you can go and provide a somewhat reasonable answer to all of these different things. And we'll be coming back and re-emphasizing all of these pieces in class when I see you next.